10 unprecedented measures as the government announces a multi-billion-pound rescue package to try to save businesses and jobs from the coronavirus crisis. Deserted restaurants, empty bars. The Chancellor promises £330 billion of support, including government-backed loans and a business rate holiday for those hardest hit. Empty streets too, as millions of people follow Downing Street's instructions to work from home and avoid social contact. There'll be mortgage holidays for those who need it.
The coronavirus pandemic is a public health emergency, but it is also an economic emergency. We have never in peacetime faced an economic fight like this one.
And it's scary, you know. People in there, they don't know what to do. They've got mortgages, they've got kids to think about, rent.
First the medical measures and now the money. Vast and expensive promises from the government, but still, will they be enough?
The NHS in England will suspend non-urgent operations for 3 months from next month to make 30,000 more beds available for coronavirus patients. The Foreign Office has advised Britons against all non-essential travel abroad for at least a month. But schools remain open for now. The Prime Minister says he is monitoring the situation closely.
And in London, after the Chancellor's announcement, we get reaction from businesses in the capital struggling due to the outbreak. And how tube platforms usually look in rush hour, but not today, as commuters stay away.
Good evening. The Chancellor has announced a multi-billion-pound support package to help businesses through the coronavirus crisis. Rishi Sunak said the country is in an economic emergency and now is the time to be bold. He vowed that the government would do whatever it takes to support the economy, with many businesses reeling from the effects of this week's coronavirus restrictions. He announced a wide-ranging package of loans and guarantees worth £330 billion. There'll be a 12-month business rates holiday, and those with mortgages will be offered a 3-month break in mortgage payments. But there was no mention yet of help for millions of people who rent. It comes as the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in the UK rose to nearly 2,000 and the number of deaths reached 71. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg is in Westminster. Laura.
Sophie, very rarely round here is there a day when it feels like the landscape has been totally transformed. But it's clear now, not just because of the measures the government is prepared to take to try to protect the nation's health, but the scale of the measures they believe are needed now to prop up the economy, to protect the UK's livelihood for as long as this crisis goes on. The Chancellor has announced a huge new British bailout, one that would have been unimaginable just a few days ago. And with some businesses fearing the worst, some of them on the edge, planes grounded, even places of worship curtailed, at least for a time, Britain feels like it will temporarily become a different land.
Everything seems different now. You can be on your own in the busiest parts of our biggest city. But quiet doesn't mask the worry. Millions are concerned about their health and loved ones too. But instead of shut down, behind closed doors, the centre of government is in overdrive. They're grappling with the biggest job in generations, to save lives first, but to protect how we make a living too.
We must act like any wartime government and do whatever it takes to support our economy.
You can't blame the new Chancellor for looking serious. Just 33 days into his job, here he is announcing a bailout of historic proportion.
This national effort will be underpinned by government interventions in the economy on a scale unimaginable only a few weeks ago. This is not a time for ideology and orthodoxy. Today I am making available an initial £330 billion of guarantees, equivalent to 15% of our GDP. That means any business who needs access to cash to pay their rent, their salaries, suppliers, or purchase stock will be able to access a government-backed loan or credit on attractive terms.
Hundreds of billions of government-backed loans, 20 billion in grants and tax cuts at the start, help with some bills too.
For those in difficulty due to coronavirus, mortgage lenders will now offer a 3-month mortgage holiday so that people will not have to pay a penny towards their mortgage costs while they get back on their feet.
Can you guarantee to firms who need to pay wages now and families who worry about paying the rent now that they will not lose out while you work through the details of what comes next?
Be in no doubt, the state is asking people to do something to make very considerable changes to their lives, and it is only right, therefore, that the state should stand behind people as they make those changes.
Business, big and small, might not have the luxury of time. The office of this Brighton travel company is already practically empty.
I don't think Boris Johnson realises that people are losing their jobs right now. We've had to put staff on unpaid sabbatical with no certainty of what's going to happen over the next few months.
Are you doing enough to stop the virus?
Ministers have been scrambling to find a response big and fast enough. It might sound astonishing, but even more than £300 billion might be just the start. The support plan's huge, but there could still be holes.
What support will individual families get? Will they get sick pay at a level that they'll be able to ensure they have a decent quality of life? Will they get proper support if they're laid off? Will they be able to afford their rent? Will the increases in fuel costs and other things be covered?
But the scale of this, the reality of how many lives may be lost, is hitting home.
Every year in seasonal flu, the number of deaths is thought to be about 8,000 excess deaths. So if we can get this down to numbers 20,000 and below, that's a good outcome in terms of where we would hope to get to with this outbreak, but I mean, it's still horrible.
By the government's own admission, this is now an economic emergency. So they've just promised to take vast steps to try to stop that turning into individual hardship for millions in the coming months, taking on long-term costs for the country to try to stop a heavy and painful cost being paid by families in the coming months.
The need for help for the country's health and the country's wealth is acute. Reassurance is not a currency in itself. Laura Pinsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So billions of pounds worth of loans will be available from next week to help businesses pay for supplies, rent and salaries. The Chancellor said that if these measures were not enough, he would go further. Our economics editor Faisal Islam looks at the new measures in detail and asks if they'll be enough to prevent businesses going under.
In Manchester, preparations for what should have been a busy St Patrick's Day went on this morning. Local businesses contemplating ruin from the government's advice to help stop the spread of the virus by not going out.
Telling people not to go to bars and restaurants and not giving us any support at this point of the day is a real noose around our necks.
Absolutely.
But it's that point of just tell us.
The word recession doesn't quite capture the effect on the pub industry and others of clearing the streets of major cities of actual people.
We have never faced an economic fight like
But by late evening, the Chancellor had fundamentally upped the size of the life jacket for the entire economy.
Amazing. That's a real pressure for us because we're like over £50,000 our rates, so that's really good for us.
Coronavirus is now a reality for the whole country, but the theory behind today's interventions is that in some months' time the epidemic will pass and the economy will grow again. This is a bridge, not a bailout, and that is why the support, which promises to do whatever it takes, lasts for months, not years. There's £330 billion in government-backed loans of up to a year for all sizes of business to fund cash flow for wages and suppliers. There's £20 billion in cash grants and business tax cuts, and everybody that needs it can have a 3-month mortgage holiday. These huge amounts reflect the fact that in the next few months a large chunk will be taken off the UK economy. Car production suspended here today at Nissan in Sunderland and in most European car factories. The retailer Laura Ashley went into administration today blaming the virus, though it has had its own challenges, illustrating the problem for the government about whether all firms should get cheap loans. Back in Manchester, a chef at an art centre that has closed is wondering what happens to renters too.
It's scary, you know. People in there, they don't know what to do. They've got mortgages, they've got kids, think about rent.
So there will be many other forms of support that will be required to keep the significant promise made in Downing Street today unthinkable a month ago, unavoidable now.
Faisal is with me now. I mean, the measures that have been announced today are on a scale that we've just never seen before.
These are huge sums, and you can forget about the numbers in the budget book less than a week ago. And that's because when you shut down cities, when aviation is grounded, the impact on the economy is not fractions of a percent, it's fractions of the entire economy. And that's why the response has to also be worth a sixth or seventh of the entire economy, as this would be in terms of loan guarantees and cash handouts. It's hundreds of billions. There is a risk that these loans might not be paid back, higher than in other types of scheme like this that we've had before. It's in line now with what the French announced yesterday, Spanish announced, and a bit more than what the Americans announced in terms of the size of the economy. A significant move indeed. And it's not, I see it as more of a bridge than a bailout. It's designed to get into the minds of business owners and say to them, yes, your cash may be running down because your customers aren't there, but just think that you can get to the side of this valley and carry on paying your workers. And if you get there, then we can provide that bridge for you.
And if you are one of these businesses that already is on its knees, I mean, how will this work? What will they do?
So it depends on the size of the company. Sort of small and medium-sized companies sort of operate through the banking system essentially, and through banks, and they'll be supported in turn by the Bank of England and the Treasury. For bigger businesses, essentially it's that your cash would run down, and then you get an overdraft via selling an IOU to the Bank of England, and if that wasn't paid back, the Treasury would repay it. That's the mechanism, a bit complicated, but that's how you do these sorts of things. Doesn't cover renters yet. The mortgage guarantee, obviously, because it's a mortgage guarantee, doesn't cover things like support for self-employed, but I'm told that this is a down payment. More will have to come if you want to meet the promise of whatever it takes.
Thank you. Well, meanwhile, all non-urgent operations will be cancelled in April for 3 months to free up 30,000 beds for the NHS in England. Scotland has taken a similar decision already. Our health editor Hugh Pym looks at how prepared the NHS is for a growing number of severe cases.
Bolton Medical Centre, Jerry speaking.
Preparing for the new realities. This GP surgery in Bolton is urging all patients to stay away if they possibly can. Consultations will now be carried out on the phone and on video link.
Does that tell us you will have to self-isolate 14 days?
We are sort of being very proactive, so we're keeping patients informed. This morning, we're triaging everybody if they're queuing up outside to, why have you accessed the surgery? Please try and phone up, don't come to the surgery.
Some medical students are volunteering to move to the front line.
The final year medical students will hopefully be working in the ward areas, and this is to free up staff that can go onto the front line in places like intensive care.
Some medical staff are frustrated they're not getting tested for the virus. Sandra, who's a nurse, had a sore throat and today was asked to stay off work.
They could do a swab that will take 5 minutes, 2 days for the results, and confirm whether I actually have coronavirus or whether I don't.
Office has made the unprecedented decision to advise against all non-essential travel to anywhere in the world. It said countries could shut their borders with no notice in response to the pandemic. The European Union has banned non-EU citizens from entering for 30 days. UK citizens are unaffected. Here's our transport correspondent, Tom Burridge.
Confusion and a very long wait at Marrakesh Airport.
We've just been in a 5-hour-long queue
as people like Amir try to get home.
Got to the front of the queue and they said there are no flights, they won't tell us any more details, they don't know any more details, they don't know when they're going to get us to the UK, they don't know when the flights are going to be, they've told us to just wait in the airport.
All flights scheduled to leave Morocco have been suspended, so it's a scramble to get on rescue flights back to Britain.
Hello, my name is Beth. I'm a UK citizen, currently stuck here in Morocco.
Beth unclear when she'll get back to her job in the NHS.
We've been told that we will get a rescheduled flight for August, for April. That is no good. We do not know how this pandemic is going to pan out, and we need to get home, and they have a duty of care to get us home.
We will do everything in our power.
But the government says repatriating most people is down to airlines.
SCO teams around the world are working urgently to ensure that governments have sensible plans to enable the return of British and other travellers, and crucially, to keep borders open for a sufficient period to enable returns to take place on commercial flights wherever that's possible.
In Cusco and other parts of Peru, British tourists like Lauren are stuck.
I can't get out of Peru, and they've cancelled all flights to get out of Peru.
The country is in lockdown.
It's very, very scary, mainly for the fact of if it's just a 14-day lockdown, it's not very pleasant, but okay to get over. But the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen, and the fact that we can't leave the hostel.
Stephen's in the capital, Lima.
We're worried about potential social unrest. There's kind of supplies run low. We haven't got any food, so we're going to have to go to the supermarket shortly. We're young and healthy, but of course we're also worried about what happens if we get sick.
Tom Burridge, BBC News.
This evening it was announced that no new jury trial in England and Wales should start unless it's expected to last for 3 days or less because of the dangers posed by coronavirus. The escalation in restrictions on our lives were partly prompted by research from a team at Imperial College London who said this was the worst respiratory virus since the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. They warned that Britain was on course for a catastrophic epidemic and the number of deaths in the UK could reach 250,000 unless there was a new approach to the pandemic. Here's our science editor, David Shaw.
From the start of the outbreak,